Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Michael Van Beek. I'm the Director of Research at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. Very warm welcome to everyone who's tuning in to this event. We have a terrific event scheduled for today with a panel of experts who are going to talk about how we can make Michigan's K-12 education system more flexible for parents and for students. The need for greater flexibility in the state's education system has been underscored by the recent experiences with pandemic restrictions and with remote learning. And today we'll have a panel of expert speakers who will describe policies that would give families and students across Michigan the ability to craft individualized combinations of virtual and in-person learning experiences, as well as choose things like dual enrollment courses and career apprenticeships. So we're looking forward to the discussion. Before we do that, I want to point out a couple of things to the audience. One is that this event is being recorded, and so you will be able to go and view a recording of the event or share it with a friend on the Mackinac Center's website, which is mackinac.org, and just search for events, and you'll be able to find a recording of this one. And the second thing is that I'll be asking the panel questions throughout the event, but you can also ask questions as well. There is a Q&A button that you should see on your screen. If you just type in a question there, I will try to ask it of the panelists towards the end of the program. And even if I don't get to your questions, we'll try our best to answer it with a follow-up email, or one of the panelists might type an answer to you right there in the Q&A box as well. So with that, I want to introduce the Mackinac Center's president, Joe Layman. He's going to say a few words before the panel kicks off. Joe started with the Mackinac Center in 1995 and became the center's president in 2008. So Joe, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thanks to the Mackinac Center friends and supporters who have joined the show today. So 2021 is underway and has been underway now. The legislature is back in session. Our government affairs team is very active and expanded, looking at what we can do to expand educational options with some legislative tools and bills that are working their way through committees right now. Also, we're looking at more flexibility for the provision of healthcare. The need for this has become very obvious in the pandemic. The Mackinac Center has had some success getting Michigan's rules relaxed on things like telemedicine and artificially limiting the number of hospital beds and other medical machines that require a government permission slip. So there's been some good cooperation with the governor there, but not yet as much as we like, and we haven't been able to make those reforms permanent. And there is another move in the legislature, as there always seems to be, to increase corporate welfare. And this time, no surprise, the reason that is given for needing more corporate welfare is, well, it's the pandemic. The pandemic is the reason. I guess a lot of things have to be done, but we're making the case that pandemic or no, corporate welfare doesn't work. It isn't fair. In fact, it's counterproductive. And we certainly should not be spending the taxpayers' scarce resources on subsidies for a few well-connected businesses at a time when government edicts are in a blanket fashion shutting down thousands of businesses and making it impossible for them to operate, generally the smaller businesses. Now, I said our government affairs team is expanded, and that's because we have added Greg George as Director of Government Affairs, and he joins David Gunther. He'll be reporting to David, who is our Senior Strategist for Government Affairs in Lansing. And so the Mackinac Center is doubling its footprint in our ability to help lawmakers understand good economics and the economic ramifications of the various proposals that find their way through the legislature. The Mackinac Center is also continuing with your help. We're now in the third year of a project of informing unionized government workers all over the country about their newly recognized legal rights to resign from a union. Government unionized employees are now treated the same as right to work employees, any unionized worker in a right to work state. And so our outreach effort in several states, not just Michigan, but we focused on Michigan already is right to work, as you know, but we focused on larger states where hundreds of thousands of workers have been, let's just say the unions haven't made it easy for them to exercise their rights to leave the union. But with the Mackinac Center's help, now 14% of unionized workers who work for the government at some level are keeping their own dues and spending their own dues the way that they want to. And so that's a great expansion of freedom. And it was possible for Mackinac to lead the way around the country because with your help, we helped Michigan become a right to work state, which of course people around the country said could never be done. And the Mackinac Center, we just sort of took a look back at 2020, and 2020 was the Mackinac Center's third best year ever for financial support. And that says a lot about our supporters. In a time of great uncertainty, at a time when resources were badly needed in other philanthropic projects, helping people who were harmed by the pandemic, and people, many of our supporters have businesses that have been suffering still. You came through and were able to provide us the resources to make sure that free market voices were heard during the health crisis that still goes on, as you know. And that work gets noticed. We haven't even announced this publicly yet. We may do so today, but the Mackinac Center has been found among the top 4% of all think tanks in North America. In Washington, outside of Washington, liberal think tanks, conservative think tanks, center think tanks, the Mackinac Center is the 85th ranked think tank in North America. By an annual survey put out by the University of Pennsylvania Think Tanks Project. So there's a lot that goes into that. The University of Pennsylvania does all the work trying to analyze which think tanks have influence. And it's really a proxy for what research institutes out there, independent of government, are the most listened to by lawmakers, by journalists, by policymakers, by opinion leaders. So I'm very proud that we can say that we're not only in the top 5%, in the top 4%. And lastly, when this program is over, you might want to tune in to something on the Mackinac Center's website. It's a feature on our blog called "What Does a Think Tank Do?" And it's an interview with my colleague Mike Reitz. He is the executive vice president of the Mackinac Center, and he just does some explanation for a lay audience about what's the work of a think tank and why is it important. So I encourage you to tune in. And in fact, I'll use this moment to ask our Sandra Darland, who handles our events. Maybe Sandra can make sure that the link to "What Does a Think Tank Do?" gets put in the Q&A box so that everyone can see it. So thanks again, supporters and friends of the Mackinac Center. The education program today is well worth our focus and attention because, as we've long said, if we don't get education policy right, it may not matter what other policies we do get right in Michigan. Back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Joe. Let me introduce the panelists for today's discussion. First, we have Cara Candal. She is the Director of Educational Opportunity for ExcelinEd. Prior to that, she worked as an education policy expert for about 10 years with the Pioneer Institute and the Center for Education Reform. She also helped found the National Academy of Advanced Teacher Education and served some time as a professor at Boston University as well. She's originally from Michigan, but now lives in Boston. Also is Ben DeGrow. Ben is the Mackinac Center's Director of Education Policy. He's been an education policy expert for many years. He joined the center in 2015 after a long stint in Colorado with the Independence Institute, which is the Colorado's version of the Mackinac Center, essentially, a state-based think tank there. Also, we have Zach Eckert. He is the Midwest Regional Advocacy Director for ExcelinEd. Previously, Zach worked for the Indiana State Senate, serving as a policy analyst for the Senate Majority Caucus, focusing specifically on education policy. And last, we have Phil Janis. Phil is the principal of FlexTech High School in Shepherd, Michigan. Formerly a social studies teacher, Phil has degrees from Michigan State and from Western Michigan. So welcome, panelists. I'm going to start with a question for Ben. The question is, the educational challenges that we are experiencing didn't begin with COVID, though many more students are struggling as a result of remote learning and some of these other issues related to the pandemic. How would you characterize the challenges facing Michigan students right now and their ability to access the kinds of courses that they need to graduate and succeed?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. It's a big issue. With good reason right now, most of our educators and policymakers, they're fixated on trying to remedy the challenges associated with the pandemic and the crisis of lost learning there, and rightly so. There's no doubt what we've gone through in the past year has really broadened and deepened that challenge. Of course, every young person, every student in Michigan deserves the opportunity at an exceptional education, the chance to succeed. We've seen far too many fall through the cracks this year, but even before the pandemic, some things to consider to put the need for reform in perspective. According to the NAEP test, which is the nation's gold standard test, a third of Michigan's 8th graders consistently fall below basic levels of math proficiency and about a quarter below basic in reading. By the time they get to 11th grade, we have only 36% of our students who are college ready in math, and the number who are college ready in reading is on the decline. Every year, students are dropping out. About 1 in 8 students will not even finish after 6 years, and that number has only increased with the pandemic. And then when they graduate, about 1 in 4 high schoolers have to take remedial college coursework. And this one is probably the least well known. Data from the U.S. Department of Education shows that somewhere between 15 and 25% of Michigan high schoolers, depending on the course, mostly in rural areas, they don't have access to things like physics or calculus or AP courses or things that might help them get on track for college. So then what we saw came the COVID crisis. And a couple developments really highlighted the lack of flexibility, the challenge of the transition to remote instruction. A week after the pandemic announcement came out, the Michigan Department of Education told schools in a memo not to count instructional hours, basically discouraging all the work of educators at the local level and creating confusion. And that was the work of our state bureaucracy. And then, as many students realized they could only learn from an online platform, a lot of people tried to transition to our Michigan Virtual University, which is the state's supplemental course provider on the online platform. And the demand for those courses soared such that the Michigan Virtual couldn't keep up with the demand or the number of teachers qualified to teach them and had to shut off course enrollments. So we had more students disconnected, dropped out during the shift to remote learning, and we see many students fall behind. So while many students, are not as well adapted to full-time online learning as the best answer for their situation, many of them saw benefits in aspects of online courses to supplement their education, but the quality of instruction that's coming through the remote environment has been sketchy at best. Some hardworking educators are struggling through today's challenges, but the response we're seeing, I like to call the education industrial complex, is pretty much just a focus on collecting as much money as possible to solve the problem and continue business as usual. But we think this is an opportunity to kind of reimagine how we can tailor the education system going forward to give students a shot at success. And so, I mean, there are examples out there of schools that are doing it right, and Michigan has an opportunity to learn from them. So.
That's right. There are some schools that are doing things a little bit differently, unconventionally maybe. And Phil, Janis with FlexTech High School in Shepherd, that you're doing things differently. Can you explain a little bit about how the FlexTech model works, and what is unique about what your school is up to there?
Sure. Just wanted to make sure I unmuted myself. Yeah, absolutely. So we exist as a project-based learning school, and what that means is we're basically having students demonstrate their learning through making, doing, or showing something is our goal. So a good example of that, just because it's always easier to kind of come up with a tangible example, is we have a quilting project that our students are just finishing up for a geometry class right now, and angles, patterns, reflections are all demonstrated in a physical way of them actually going through and making that. What's been really cool this year is that even with everything going on and even in this setting, we've been able to figure out how to still do some things like that, have a little bit of a sense of normalcy for our program. Technology's always been involved in everything that we do from day one. So to pivot to what it had to look like this year was definitely a change, but it wasn't something that was totally out of the realm of things that we were doing already. So in that sense, I felt like our students and staff were a little bit more prepared maybe than a traditional setting, because we were already thinking and doing things differently. And obviously in going through this last year, almost full year since last spring, of operating in this kind of a different setting, I think we've even been encouraged to think about things even more differently than we had been before. And be more creative with our ways of presenting our curriculum, not only to our students, but also getting them engaged in everything that we do.
Great. And a lot of the choices that exist right now for Michigan students and families are really about choosing a school and maybe, kind of buying that whole package of the school program. But one of the plans that the Mackinac Center recently published a report about called Flex Learning is allowing for more choice at the course level. So allowing students to choose courses from a wide variety of different providers. And I want to turn to Cara now and ask her, being a national expert in following policy across the country, if she could talk a little bit about what kind of things are other states doing when it comes to allowing students to select courses kind of on an individual basis.
Thank you. First, let me say I feel really excited to be with you guys today. And I've lived in Boston for the same amount of time that I lived in Michigan at this point in my life, but I'm a Michigander at heart. And I grew up in Canton, and I still spend every summer in beautiful Elk Rapids, Michigan. So this is near and dear to me because I really want to see my home state center education policies around things that work for parents and kids. So to your question, most states nationally, not a good number, we're close to a majority, have something that they refer to as course access or course flexibility on the books. But it's in very, very few states. I think Michigan does too, as to Ben's point. But it's in very, very few states that those choices are actually meaningful. So I'll give you an example. A lot of states have something that they call open enrollment. If I am not happy with the offerings in my district, I might be able to say, wow, there's a couple seats open at this district next door that has these classes that I really want. Maybe it's physics, whatever it is, AP courses. But in a lot of states, in far too many states, it's actually really difficult for families to access those. They might go to the district and the district might say, no, it's up to us and not today. We're not going to enroll you today for pretty much any reason, right? So that's what makes course access really difficult. Now, the pandemic highlighted this problem, really put it in stark relief. I'll give an example of something that we saw happening in Arizona, which is a state known for probably having the most choice in terms of charter schools and private school choice, et cetera, in the country. And what happened in Arizona is that families were finding they would be really happy with the math course that the school in which they were enrolled was providing, but boy, they weren't happy with English or Spanish, right? So they would like meander over to, say, a charter school that had a really good reputation for offering this great online English course. And the charter school would say, well, we're not bound by, facilities at this point in time. So sure, come on down, which raises a whole bunch of questions that the Mackinac Center is trying to answer around, well, how does this work? And what is funding like? And what does it mean to really provide choice in the sense down to the most granular level? I can take one course here and one course there, maybe one's online, maybe another's in person. So we're looking at a couple of states that have what I would call really robust course access, and I'm only going to highlight two at this point, which kind of shows you where we are nationally and why I think this proposal for flex learning is really ahead of the game. And the first one is Utah. So Utah is limited in the sense that it's all virtual, but for several years now, Utah has had a really robust virtual school. So not experiencing the kind of difficulties that Ben described in oh my goodness, too many kids want us and now we're going to collapse, right? And so the thing that's key about Utah's courses is that students can, of course, they can go full-time virtual, they can pick and choose a couple of classes that they want while remaining enrolled in their primary school. But the thing that I like to highlight about Utah is that the courses that students have and that they take through these virtual providers that might contract out are really well vetted. So we know that they're high quality courses. Okay. So that's one example. Another really exciting example that's newer than Utah is taking place just north of me here in Boston in New Hampshire. And they have something called the Learn Everywhere program. And the idea here is that students should not be bound by brick and mortar schools. And if you think about New Hampshire, it's like a lot of places in Michigan. It can be very rural. They have some urban centers, but a lot of rural centers. And schools are very rooted in communities, but kids don't always have the options that they need. So under Learn Everywhere, a child could, for example, say, well, high schoolers, not really a child, I want to take this supplemental education course, this dance class, and I'm going to do it at my local community theater. And the State Board of Education has approved that local community theater as a provider, knows that what they're getting is good stuff, right? Same thing, there's a great Air and Science Museum. Why not take a physics course there? So much like Utah, these courses are approved by the State Board of Education. And then families can go and take courses up to 30% of course credits can be taken through the Learn Everywhere program. The problem here is that currently families bear the cost, any cost of tuition that the provider might charge. So New Hampshire is working on what we call an education scholarship account. My colleague Zach might talk about that could help families pay to offset, the tuition that private providers might charge. But those are two really exciting examples right now. And when I hope that we'll continue to talk about the flex learning proposal here, but I want to highlight, and we can get into this later, 3 principles that I think we need to be thinking about. And those are robust course offerings. So families have to have actual options. It can't just be one physics course here, one online English course there. How do we know about quality? As I mentioned with New Hampshire and Utah, both of that for quality. And then the funding question. So I think we're going to get into that a little bit later, but I wanted to put those things on the table as things that we have to consider when it comes to course access.
Thanks, Cara. Let's turn to Zach next. Zach, you follow specifically the Midwest region and what states are doing there. Michigan obviously isn't the only state that is thinking about different ways of delivering K-12 education now in light of the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about what proposals are in other states and what other policymakers are thinking about doing in our neighboring regions?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Appreciate it. So in terms of course access, we are looking at Indiana and Missouri right now. They both have existing course access programs. So these students can take a course in person at another school. It can be blended. It can be purely online. Like I said, they've both been in existence for a couple years now, and we're seeing problems with both. So for instance, there are ways for school districts to shut down students enrolling in those courses. So they can say, for instance, that it's logistically infeasible. I'm not for sure what that definition means, and that's the problem. Kind of puts things up there for them. They can cause roadblocks that probably aren't a real roadblock. Additionally, we're looking at Wisconsin. There was legislation filed last year on their course access program that would have allowed private schools to participate in that. We're looking to see if that legislation will come back as well. And Cara mentioned this briefly. Outside of just what we're talking about with course access, we're also seeing bills with regarding education scholarship accounts, or also known as ESAs. We have bills moving in Missouri, Indiana, Kansas, Iowa, all over the Midwest. So we're definitely seeing an increase in school choice in general and trying to provide more access for students.
Can you explain a little bit more about ESAs and how those work, just in case viewers aren't familiar?
Yeah, of course. So basically, it creates an account with funding in it for a family to use on their education. They can use that at a private school. They can use that for tutoring services. They can use that for, buying a laptop if they're learning from home now. It's pretty broad usually in terms of what they can use that funding for, but there are safeguards in place to make sure that they're not using that money the wrong way. So everyone from the provider who maybe offers those courses to the parent and the student who are buying and purchasing those things, those are audited, those are monitored to make sure that everything's being done the right way.
Ben, let's get into the details of this Flex Learning plan. The system that we have in place for K-12 schools, government-provided schools, is rooted in sort of a 19th century model of how schooling has to be done, where students have to gather together in a room together, and a teacher stands at the front of the room and gives them instruction. So that's how the system is set up. That's how the funding kind of works in that way too, or around that kind of design. So can you explain, what is the Flex Learning Plan, and what kind of changes it would make, or what kind of policy changes would be needed in order to make some of these options a reality for Michigan parents?
So, the vision of Flex Learning really is to maximize student opportunity, to give students more different pathways that they can chart to get to graduation, where they're not just considered a whole student in a district and they have to take all the offerings provided by that particular district where they're enrolled. There are minor exceptions to that right now. Students can take up to 2 courses online in a year through a limited name. We want to break that wide open and create a maximum amount of flexibility. And I'm also glad that Zach brought up some of these private school choice programs in other neighboring states, because that does help Michigan contrast, and that as much as we would like to expand choice in the realm of the private school realm, we are limited by our state constitution. So part of the inspiration in our Flex Learning is maximum opportunity within the public education system, which would necessitate some changes in state law. So into the details, as you asked. Flex Learning would be an option for any Michigan public school student in grades 7 through 12, and that would include taking our current open enrollment law, the school, being open for those students to not just enroll full-time as a full-time student in a neighboring district or a charter school, but to select individual courses offered by any public school in the state of Michigan. That could be a district, that could be a charter school, it could also be a community college or a public university. So eligible classes and programs under Flex Learning would include the virtual, as we talked about. That's the main one because the technology enables that access to hybrid learning programs. There are some of those where students do some of their coursework online, but the school provides like a drop-in center where they can check in with a tutor or a mentor, and to allow districts to provide those on an individual course level to students regardless of where they're otherwise enrolled. It could include dual enrollment courses, so students could get credit for college, It could include trade and technical courses. Well, I think one of the most interesting and innovative parts of it would be apprenticeships. Just pretty much the only requirement there being that a business or an enterprise would have to partner with one of these public school entities to provide the course credit. And as Cara mentioned, the key really here is the funding issue. So right now students get, or the district gets in a student's name, a foundation allowance. And that's about $8,000 at the lower level for most students in the state of Michigan. What we propose under Flex Learning is that students can take a portion of that per pupil allowance and allot that to purchase a course through the statewide course catalog, which right now is limited to the Michigan virtual, but would allow all kinds of the providers, whether it's another district or a charter providers, to charge money for a course. The student could take some of their public funding and their foundation allowance and purchase that course as long as they've had the prerequisite for it and it gives them credit toward graduation. I think one other thing we propose to do would be boosting incentives for students. So a couple of ways we do that to promote quality. Course quality is to hold back half the funding for the course until the student successfully completes it. And then another incentive would be for students who are on the accelerated track, if they could finish early, to take a portion of the foundation allowance funding that would go to them for their senior year and give a portion of that to them as this learning. Finally, interesting piece, because Zach mentioned education savings accounts. This would be kind of like Michigan's version of an education savings account within the public school system, because we know that courses alone are not the only ingredients for student success. Especially for students who need it, we can envision a portion of their per pupil allowance being able to use that to pay for internet services for those students who have a hard time there, or devices, or transportation to another course or program, as well as a tutoring service or guidance service or special education therapies that are provided by any district or charter in the state of Michigan. So maximum opportunity, maximum flexibility within the public education system in Michigan, and we can consider more of those details momentarily.
So one of the things that Flex Learning would allow more access to for more students would be dual enrollment opportunities and even potentially apprenticeships with local businesses. Phil, at FlexTech, you do both of those things. Can you talk more about how that works at FlexTech and kind of the importance of fostering relationships with local businesses and partnering with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it speaks to a lot of what's been talked about already during this. We have students that are all over the entire spectrum in interests, and as far as where they're at in their high school career, what kind of credits they need, what kind of experiences they're looking for, what they're looking to do afterwards. So we have students that are doing dual enrollment and college courses through our early college that we set up. We are looking into now doing the same thing with apprenticeships with businesses. We have students that are part of the tech center in the area and do some of those courses to actually count towards some core credit courses for graduation. And we think that we'd be able to operate some internships and apprenticeships very much the same way with businesses as well, counting some of that real world experience and knowledge towards graduation for our students' journeys. I think it's absolutely critical because it not only helps to get them into a different setting outside of the school building and get them more used to a professional setting, but also helps them develop everything that comes along with that, just being a professional, being on time, being able to relate to other people in a professional setting and working with other people at various ages. They're not always going to be your exact same grade or age level either. So I think all of those kind of things are additional benefits to that kind of a program and partnering in different ways to do it. We really strive for having our students, and again, the flexibility even increased even more so this year. But the idea is that really we want them, especially as they get to those older ages and grades, we want them to be outside of our building and experiencing learning in different ways. It's not it's not really meant, I think, for especially the students that are finding us and finding our school. They're not the type of students that want to sit in a classroom all day. They want to have some of these experiences and be able to have some of these choices for themselves.
And what kind of experience have you had so far with students? I'm not sure exactly how long FlexTech has been operating, but do you have some stories of students who have taken well to this, and where you can see that it's working well for some students?
Absolutely. So this is our third year now. We started off with grades 9 and 10. We grew 8 through 11 last year, and then finally added grade 12 now this year. That top grade just kept growing, and we grew with it every year. So that's where we're at. We're at full size now. We don't anticipate adding any other grades. But throughout that process, we found students that, every school, every public school has kind of that spectrum of students that are really struggling all the way through students that are really pushing the envelope and succeeding highly. I think it's just more of a stark contrast that usually happens at charter schools. So we usually get students that are struggling mightily and students that are very, very much succeeding and wanted something that would challenge them, and not a lot of students necessarily in between. So they're coming and finding us for these options. And we've had students catch up that have had no success where they were coming from before in a traditional setting. In fact, one gentleman that will be graduating with us this year caught up an entire year and a half within this 3-year journey through being able to do not only our program and our curriculum with project-based learning, but involving himself in the tech center and some of the other options that we have available, and finding a way to get himself caught up. And he's just worked very hard to do it too. But something clicked, and I think our atmosphere clicked, and something that we strive for as well is just really treating our students like human beings and not necessarily little kids. And I think that whole mentality kind of works itself into it. And being able to just take a step back and say, the more options that we can provide, the more choice that we have out there is great, but also then trusting them to be able to tell you, hey, I'm interested in this. Could we do this? Listening to the students and parents for that aspect of things, I think is just as important as well. And we've seen the benefits as a result. We have a couple of kids in early college right now as well, because that's what fit them really well. So they're doing half-time our program, half-time doing full-on college courses. And there's a whole variety of things to do. And I think, again, just trusting them to be able to have those conversations with students and families and say, what are you interested in? What are you looking for? How can we figure out how to provide that for you? Versus kind of having that canned set program for everybody.
Well, it's great. It's great to hear that we have these at least some models in Michigan at work right now where students are getting that kind of flexible approach that they might need, and that it's working for some students. It's definitely clicking for them. Cara, you mentioned earlier some principles that you think are important for policymakers to consider when thinking about expanding these kinds of opportunities for more students. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what those principles are and why they're important?
Sure, yeah. I would say there are 3. It's options, quality, and funding. So when I think about options, what I think about, and Ben was describing this, it's like, what's the menu and how robust is the menu? It's not just about early college. It's not just about the math course. It should be about really parents having information and being able to sit down and say, wow, this AP course over here, I can take this course at a community college over here. Maybe it's a specialized English course from a public school district that just has more students and therefore more offerings than yours. So, course access without diversity of offerings really is not meaningful. I would add to that supplemental learning. One of the things we know without a doubt is something that certainly separates higher income families who have access to educational opportunity and lower working and middle class families who have more limited access to educational opportunities is their ability to access supplemental programming, whether it's music classes or Kumon or something like that. So, tutoring, all of these things that Zach was talking about, ESAs, that families can take advantage of with ESAs, that should be a part, if we can make it in this, what we're calling it sort of public school course access program, that should be a part of it, because supplemental learning opportunities, including, I would add, summer learning opportunities, are huge. Quality is the second, and I already said a little bit about that courses should be vetted on the front end. They should also be accounted for on the back end. And what I mean by that, and we can talk a little bit more about this in a bit, is we have to have transparency and evidence around what students can do if they participate in this program. How do we know if it's working? And that shouldn't be an overregulated system, but it should be a transparent system. And so that part of it, the quality part, is really, really important. And I would add in the quality bucket, quality of information for families, right? So if you ask your average, Michigan parent right now, do you think your kid could take a math class 2 districts away? They would probably look at you like blankly, right? Most parents have very little information, and the onus is upon the administrator, whether it's the state or somebody else, to make sure that that information is there for parents. And then the final one is funding. And obviously, as I already pointed out in the case of New Hampshire, they're working toward it. But if families have to pay providers in anything more than a very small amount, it should be zero, right, for courses, then we're going to have certain kids that are already at an inherent disadvantage, which is really important. So I think anytime we can take funding and make it follow the child, as it is in this proposal, that's the way we should be doing it. Certainly the states can't afford another appropriation, right? Most states can't, especially now we're looking at some really serious financial distress probably for schools in most states, not this year, but in the coming year, as a result of what we've been through. So funding is key, and helping kids sort of carry that funding from one experience to the next is a really important feature of the program.
And Zach, can you talk a bit more about lessons or observations that you might have about what other states are doing right now along these lines that Michigan policymakers could potentially learn from?
Yeah, of course, and some of these have actually already been brought up, but I'll reemphasize. So Ben and Phil were 100% on point when they were talking about using this program to provide post-secondary opportunities and CTE for students. So in Indiana, for instance, right now, like I said, that program has been in place now for, I think, 3 years. There's over 180 courses offered, but only 18 are being used by 131 students. And we found that the courses that are being used are American Sign Language, and more, not to say American Sign Language is not important, but that was not the intent of the law. The intent of the law was to allow dual credit, AP, IB, Cambridge, those kind of courses to be accessed online. So the bill that's being heard tomorrow in Indiana actually requires the DOE to prioritize those kinds of courses to make sure that they are courses that will lead to high wage, high demand jobs, going to college, that kind of thing. Secondly, I'll mention that making sure that the school districts and parents know about these programs is very important as well, and that goes without saying, but just talking to people in Indiana and Missouri about these programs, we've seen a lot of people simply not even know they exist. Third, I will say that these course access programs should not cause a conflict between public schools and private schools. So I mentioned that legislation that was in Wisconsin last year that we are expecting to have come back. The private schools in Wisconsin were actually at the forefront, more than willing to pay the public schools for those course offerings that they can't provide those students. So a lot of times when we hear about these programs, the public schools will automatically think it's a way to drive students out of their schools, that kind of thing. And we're actually seeing where it could benefit the public schools and that they would be bringing students in for a course or two a day. And then lastly, and Ben mentioned this at the beginning, is that in talking to people in both Missouri and Indiana, they feel that had these programs that were already in law been up and going, learning at home would have went a lot easier this last year. So those were some of the lessons I would want to bring up again.
Thanks, Zach. I want to ask Ben a question here that was posed by one of the viewers about Michigan's kind of unique situation nationally when it comes to providing more educational options as it relates to the so-called Blaine Amendment in the Michigan Constitution. Ben, can you explain what that is and how it presents a roadblock to a lot of these kind of opportunities for Michigan students?
Yes, and I apologize for the technical difficulties on my end. Not sure what's causing that, but the Blaine Amendment issue goes back 50 years. 1970, Michigan voters approved a constitutional amendment, arguably the most restrictive in the country, that really limits the ability of public funding to follow parent choices to private education. And so that really shaped our thinking on the flex learning proposal, because it's not an easy policy solution for legislators here to create something like an ESA program that like Wisconsin has. So what we want to do is create maximum opportunity within the public education system. And by giving districts the power to we propose giving them the power to accredit learning opportunities like New Hampshire does, as Cara was alluding to, where they could work with community groups or businesses on apprenticeships, as long as there's a nexus to public education system, a local school district or charter school overseeing that program, and then giving students the maximum ability to customize, choosing that at the individual course level. We think that's the closest thing we can get to choice without having that access to the private education part piece.
Okay, thanks, Ben. And there's another question here from one of the viewers about kind of touching on what Cara was speaking about, an important principle being ensuring quality of the course offerings. So can anyone, I'll just open it up for any of the panelists, talk more about what we can do to ensure that the additional course opportunities that are provided to students are of quality. And I think specifically people are concerned about online options and how much quality there might be there.
I can start with that. And let's start with the perception that online options are inherently low quality. Well, it's certainly the case that you have low quality online options, just like you have low quality face-to-face options. We have seen a lot of high quality online options flourishing over the years. And I think you need point no further than what most wealthy families and upper middle class families probably did the moment every school in the nation closed almost a year ago now. And that was, wow, what kind of education.com membership can I buy? How many virtual classes can I sign up for? So quality education, virtual education programs absolutely exist. So let's not foreclose them immediately. But I think it's still an important question because we need to vet virtual programs in much in the same way we would vet face-to-face programs. So, and one of the things I like to think about is looking not at, we certainly shouldn't in a program like this be looking at, well, how much seat time, we would call it in brick and mortar, right? Is a student spending in a course that they're taking in another district or from a private provider? Instead, we should have benchmarks for what is it that this student should learn in this course, be able to know and do, and does the curriculum being offered here match up to those assumptions? So that's one thing that you can do on the front end, is just really making sure that the content is there. And then there needs to be some back-end check. Now, in this proposal, I think that, and Ben will correct me if I'm wrong, but students in Michigan, this is a public school program, they're all taking some sort of state test that might be on hold for the foreseeable future. In most states, we'll see what happens. But there are other mechanisms. You could use local benchmark exams, formative assessments that I certainly hope districts are continuing to engage in. But like I said, there's also something really to be said for transparency and data collection. So in traditional private school choice programs, which is not what this is, but one of the things we do is oftentimes students will participate in a norm referenced examination, which is simply a national test. We've probably all taken them at some point in our lives. And you can sort of compare how students are doing in general content specific areas to their peers nationally. Not really suggesting that would work here, but having a similar check could work. But the other really important thing is just like, how many kids are taking this course? How do they do in subsequent courses, right? If it's a course that's required to go on, how do they do in college? We can track those things over time, which will give us really important information about quality, more so in the long term, but could be helpful in the short term.
And can you talk a little bit about the Flex Learning Plan that you've proposed, and what kind of quality control mechanisms would be in place under that kind of plan?
Sure. So one of them is I had alluded to earlier, and that is an incentive that I believe Utah uses, as Cara mentioned, by tying 50%, half of the funding to successful course completion. That creates an incentive for providers to actually help students succeed rather than just put low quality content into a catalog and not deliver. Are ways that the state could put in objective measures as far as end of course exams for especially areas like math and science, where students would have to complete that and successfully for the provider to get a measure of the rest of their funding. And other ways that also could work by promoting transparent reporting at the course level, where the public could go in and see how students are doing and faring at the individual course level, and not only on that, to see how students who complete that course do in succeeding courses and things along their future. So like a measure of attainment, showing that if you succeed at this particular district's math course, then you are more likely to succeed going forward in other math courses and in reaching a post-secondary program or something like that. So we're linking the data transparently is one other component to promoting that kind of quality.
And Phil, you mentioned that FlexTech uses a project-based learning model. That I'm slightly familiar with that. It seems like there's some quality controls kind of built into just that model. Can you explain how project-based learning works, and how you know that it's a quality kind of offering for students?
Absolutely. So yeah, we're not really using a canned curriculum or textbook or anything like that to do the entire basis of what we're doing. We have our competencies that are based off the state standards, and we go through and we even do mastery-based grading. So instead of doing a letter grade system, we're looking at actually 0 to 4. What do you actually know? Like, where are you actually at in mastering this content? And you don't get anything till a certain point, till you can't move on until you get to a certain point in that mastery scale. It's usually at the 2 level, the basic level. But it's not just, bringing in a box of Kleenexes and getting 10 points of extra credit and stuff like that going on. But we try to take these competencies and standards and really go back to planning the project with teachers and students collaborating to bring in student interest and come up with ideas like the quilting project. So here are all these concepts that you have to come up with in geometry. How could you demonstrate that or do something to demonstrate that you know what it's doing? Like, show me a reflection, show me how to actually do this at a certain angle. And we've had many other designs that have kind of fused multiple subject areas and experiences outside the school together. We had a physics project that turned into art as well, because they were able to take the force that was generated by spinning a bike tire around and figure out where the paint would go if they put paint on there, and actually create a work of art out of it and base it off of the actual physics behind that, and be able to show you, well, I knew that this would be only in this area or on this canvas at this part because we were spinning it this fast, or this part because we were spinning it this fast. So all different kinds of concepts like that.
Thanks, Phil. We have time just for one more question, and it's about one from an attendee who is asking about curriculum. I'm curious as well, what kind of curriculum standards are in place in Michigan, and are those limiting to what students can get access to? And then also from our national experts, Zach and Cara, if there are lessons that we could learn about how to develop better curricula for schools at the state level that you know of from other states, feel free to chime in as well.
I'll try to take a stab at that. I noticed here the question of who's keeping an eye on the curriculum in public schools. And I think that one thing the COVID pandemic did was give more parents a front row seat to what was being taught, and raise some concerns about what kind of things are being taught. That is definitely an area where transparency of school curriculum reporting is another policy reform avenue that could be pursued. But ultimately, the state sets the standards, the goals, what students should know and be able to do at different grade levels, and the individual school districts and charter schools are the ones supposed to be approving those standards, and it's really up to the parents and the students to keep an eye on those things. And by giving more power into their hands to make these decisions, we can help hold those institutions more accountable to them.
I can just add, from a national perspective, I mean, concerns about curriculum are concerns nationwide. And so I think what Ben just expressed, I would agree with wholeheartedly. I would put in a little plug for a project out of Johns Hopkins University. It's really, they will go into different towns and cities in your community, in your state, and assess curricula based on whether or not it's based in mastering knowledge. Not to say that skills aren't important, but really bringing to the fore what are kids being asked to learn in a community, and are they being equipped with the kind of knowledge, especially early on, that will allow them to build to mastery, right? It's sort of like critical thinking. Well, if you don't know how to think, you don't know how to think critically. I think that a lot of people would be very surprised to learn. One of the things we talk a lot about at ExcelinEd is the science of reading and K-3 literacy, right? We know, for example, in elementary schools that if children aren't reading by grade 3, they're very high risk for a number of life outcomes that aren't what parents want. And, you would be surprised, I think, regardless of what a school's curriculum looks like, whether or not a school's reading curriculum is actually rooted in what we know to be true scientifically about how kids learn to read. So there are a couple different things to think about in terms of curriculum. I would agree with Ben wholeheartedly that transparency around these things and equipping parents, in fact, to ask the right questions around these things is really, really key.
Well, thank you very much. If none of the other panelists want to chime in on that, we will conclude our event today. Thank you again to all the panelists for presenting today and teaching us more about lots of different things, how school funding works and how flexible options work and what other states are doing. So really appreciate that. As Joe Layman alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, the Mackinac Center is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that's funded entirely by private donations from supporters. So if you are interested in the work that we do, we ask that you consider supporting our work financially as well. And I also wanted to make everyone aware of an opportunity that we have at the Mackinac Center for you to stay even better informed about policy issues that you care about. It's called Opportunity Michigan. And if you go to that website, you can sign up for Opportunity Michigan, and you will get updates on policy issues from the Mackinac Center about things that you care about. And you can keep an eye on the effort that we're making to improve policy here in Michigan and improve the quality of life in Michigan as well. So again, a reminder that this event will be available as a recorded event on the Mackinac Center's website. So if you want to go view it again or share it with a friend, you can do that. And you can also find out about more events that we'll be hosting virtually and maybe in person at some point in the future. And we hope to see you again soon. So everyone take care and have a great rest of your day.